Hi, I'm Jamie Smart, and I wanted to record a brief intro to this week's podcast episode because it's a recording of two people who are very, very special to me. I met my dear friends and mentors and colleagues, Jan and Chipman, all the way back in 2009 when I attended the very first principles workshop I ever attended. And we became immediate friends, and they've contributed to me and my clients and to my life in so many ways over the years. Coaching and mentoring me and my clients, uh, co-delivering retreats with me for my clients, and it's been a wonderful experience. It's fair to say that many of the most profound, transformational insights and shifts I've had in my own life came during conversations with Jan and Chip. And so I was uh, really hit late last year when I learned the news that my beloved friend and mentor, Chip Chipman, had passed away. And that news has been uh, sending ripples through uh, me and my business and my team. We all of us have been impacted by Chip over the years in different ways, and has had us reevaluating what we're doing and how we're sharing this understanding and all of that. Anyway, this week's episode is something very, very close to my heart. It's a an excerpt from a Clarity Alive event we did back in 2020 on your true identity. And Jan and Chip Chipman were my guests at that event. And so it's with huge pleasure that I share this experience of them with you. So I hope you really enjoy it.
It's really wonderful to see everybody. It's a large group. I'm pleasantly surprised by the size of the group. 5 pages. It's funny, like how we think about, like we're at a live conference. It's like the room was big. Now it's like 5 pages. But so nice to see everybody. And the subject of the true identity is fascinating to me because that's actually the foundation of this entire exploration of the principles. The whole point of the principles is they themselves are our true identity. The principles aren't something we discover or find or learn or search for or educate ourselves about. It's actually something that we are. And in a sense, it's almost more of an unlearning to find what the principles really are, find them within.
That's a beautiful way to start, because that, to me, what I see since over all these years, it's been 45 years since we first got a glimpse of what life really is, and have been getting a wider and wider perspective ever since then. But I see a lot of people, as Chip was saying, maybe innocently, but trying to figure out the principles, or how to talk about the principles, how to share the principles. And when we just are, as you said, we just are the principles. And so to us, the most beautiful gift is that we explore the principles by finding that beautiful feeling, because you can't separate a human being experiencing their true identity without experiencing a beautiful feeling. And if the feeling's not there, that's okay. You're just being human. But to really understand your true identity, that feeling is your guide.
Yeah, and it's important to see that the feeling is the guide. And I know if anybody who's explored the principles hears over and over again about the feeling, but let me just go into that for just a minute in terms of why that's so important to see that the feeling you have is the guide. And basically, what it is that our intellect, which is a beautiful tool, is also where we get lost, right? It's also where we begin to define ourselves other than our true nature, from our experiences, from our conditioning, from all the belief systems we've adopted through our life. Our intellect is how we come to, I won't say false identity because that's too harsh, but this identity we have in terms of our personality and our personal self, right? And so one of the things I heard Sid Banks say many, many years ago that really caught my attention was he said that a new paradigm cannot be seen from an old one. Now that's really interesting when you think about it, that you cannot see a new paradigm from an old one. And it's true about exploring your true self. You can't look for your true self from your conditioned self, so to speak, because you're looking through the filter of that thinking. It's almost impossible. I mean, it is impossible, actually. And so what it comes down to is that wonderful ability to listen and get quiet so that you have a moment when the thinking that you've projected all of your life, the world you've projected all of your life, stops for a split second, right? And in that moment, that's when that beautiful feeling comes, because that is the feeling of the true self. Right? And so we can learn a great deal about the principles with our intellect. We can learn about what they do. We can learn about what thought does. We can learn about how consciousness works in this world. But the deeper understanding and the true wisdom lies in not what we do with thought, not what we do with consciousness, but what they are. What mind, consciousness, and thought are. They are the root of all experience. They are the catalyst that allows us to see this world and operate in this world. So in very simple terms, I look about it at this way too, in terms of the true self. We come into this world, and I know that we're a blank slate when we start, and we begin to have experiences. Everybody, nobody gets out of this life without having experiences, good and bad. Somewhere along the line, some of those experiences, whether they're real or imagined, create coping mechanisms and fears and insecurities, all the things we all experience in this life. And because we learn to defend ourselves in this world from certain experiences and certain feelings and so on, at some point, because we're thinkers and we're thinking about that, we begin to think those experiences, that conditioning, is us. We actually begin to think that all of that thinking that we've done throughout our lives, that formed our personal self, our personalities, our way of reacting to the world, our worldview, we actually begin to think that ball of thought is us. And the truth is, it's not. It's just a ball of thought. But until we begin to understand that and have the experience of getting quiet enough to step out of it, of course, thought is very compelling. If it wasn't compelling, none of us would have any problems. We just wouldn't. So we have this experience of developing this personal self, right? And then we go through life having this personal self, enjoy some parts of it, being offended by others, being afraid of some parts of it, developing certain habits that some are useful and some are really not useful. And we really can't figure, it's such a jumble that we really can't figure that out. There's no way you can figure out all the things you've learned to respond to the world with and all the thoughts. It's impossible. That would be like taking a grain of sand and tossing it on the beach and then going to look for that particular grain of sand. Good luck with that. But fortunately, we don't have to do that. All we have to do is get really quiet and listen. Listening is a spectacular gift, because when we truly listen at that deepest level, there's a little mathematical law that is in play, and that's very simple. You can't listen at that deep level and be quiet at that deep level, right? And think your personal thoughts at the same time. Those two activities are mutually exclusive. They can't be done together. And so when we get really quiet and we slip into just that silence, when that happens, literally turn off the world we've been projecting all of our lives, we find ourselves in this beautiful feeling. And the reason that feeling exists is that's the feeling of the true self. That's the feeling of who and what we really are.
And that something just occurred to me is that's when the learning begins, because it just occurred to me. I had a dream last night of talking to us in the early days, very early days, when the psychologists first started to come to the island. And he would talk about seeing the innocence in people and seeing people as beautiful just the way they were. And in my dream, I was remembering he was specifically talking about couples who are struggling. And he said, well, if you can see your partner is beautiful beyond their behavior, see the beauty in that, the person, whatever the outcome will be, that would be helpful for you to be able to see that, just see that person is beautiful. Don't try and be, looking at all their behavior and their faults. But what just occurred to me as we're talking is I wouldn't have been able to hear that from Sid if I hadn't first had that first insight where I saw my innocence and saw, like when I first heard Sid, what I heard was who I really am is what Chip was describing is this beautiful self. And I'd been thinking I was this personal self. And so I was always trying to figure myself out and improve myself. And all of a sudden someone says, no, who you really are is this beautiful, beautiful self. And then I was ready to hear what Sid was saying about seeing the innocence in other people. And I was then able to hear whatever he was talking about, because I'd read so many of the words in books about human beings being having this, somehow having some kind of wisdom that, and so we were always trying to find ways to access it, like through meditation and like formal techniques. But after I'd heard something, the first time I got that insight and I got that beautiful feeling, then I could hear the wisdom. And so even if I read something else, that I been familiar with in my life before I heard Sid, then all of a sudden I was hearing truth. I was hearing truth everywhere. But the feeling has to come first, that first insight where you're hearing now from a different place. You're hearing, there's this true self, and you're hearing differently.
That's beautiful. Like, I'll tell you, just as an example, tell you about the first really deep insight that I had. I had some insights that started things out. And I would actually say that they were more intellectual than deep, but they still helped. I was very resistant to the idea of Sid Banks when Jan had met him by accident. It was wild because we were at the end of our marriage. It was 1975 or 74, 75. And we weren't doing well at all, both in terms of our relationships and then each of us in terms of our state of mind. And Jan accidentally met Sid and just literally came home a changed person, which I thought was baloney and it was going to go away and couldn't be real and so on and so forth. And I actually worked actively to try to bring her back where I knew her. I would throw out things, this is hindsight, mind you. I would throw out things that I actually knew would hurt her feelings and draw her into an argument, and at first it would work a little bit. I would feel kind of self-satisfied. Now we are arguing again, but it never lasted. I would see this look on Jan where I was like, I'm not going there anymore. I don't want to live there anymore. And it wasn't directed towards me. It was, that was her feeling. And eventually, what I thought was just something that was going to pass, it became obvious to me that Jan's changed was both permanent and was sustainable, that it was a real thing. And it really confused me because I really had the idea that there were things you had to do to achieve some kind of peace of mind. You had to meditate, you had to go to India, you had to go to whatever, you know. And finally, the change in Jan just brought up this little bit of curiosity, like, what is this? You know? And honestly, I had no clue. I was like, what is this? And so I slowly began to listen. And the first thing I heard from Sid that really got my attention, I didn't get it deeply, but it really got my attention, was I heard him say in an early talk, the statement that all insecurity is an illusion created by thought. Now, for some reason, that really grabbed my attention. And I remember thinking, and I was thinking about it, that if that was only like 10% true, my whole life would be different. Right? I sort of knew that, but it still wasn't really a deep insight. It was intellectual, and I kept churning. But what started to happen is I started to see moments when I would feel very insecure and realize there was nothing in the environment, nothing around me for which that justified that feeling. And that made me even more curious. So I started to listen more. I finally listened to some friends of ours, and I started to have this sense, I guess you would call it a hope, the sense that there might be something here. Right? And what was really interesting in that period for the first few weeks after Jan met Sid is our marriage fixed itself. When I look back on it now, I think I honestly cannot see what particular thing we changed. You know, I didn't say, I'm not going to say this anymore. I'm not going to do this. Jan didn't stop doing this habit or that. Nothing. It got better on its own, so much so that I was kind of confused, like, what's going on? You know? So I was starting to have this feeling of hope and starting to have a sense of what these principles were, and that there was another world other than the one I was living in. Right? And once I had that idea that there was truly another world other than the one I was living in, that really brought in the element of hope. And that element of hope, literally, it changed the direction of my thinking. I started looking for the positive. Right? I started seeing what I had instead of what I didn't. So I was feeling better. But the moment that really showed me at a deep level what this was Jan and I were up really early one morning, just a few weeks after she met Sid. Jan was on the floor with our little son, who at the time was what, 4, 3? 3. And they were playing on the floor. And I was just sitting on the couch watching them. And it was very early in the morning, so the light was coming in at a very steep angle through this window. And it was shining in their hair. And it just made a beautiful picture. So I was looking at them. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, this feeling just whoosh, just swept in, and I teared up, and I felt all this profound emotion, which I hadn't felt that kind of feeling for a long, if ever, a long time. And it was so powerful that I looked at them, and I didn't understand this till a long time after, but I looked at them and I knew we were okay. I knew we were going to be okay. And the thought that I had looking at them and seeing them that way and having that feeling was, all they have to do is surrender. There's nothing to do. I don't have to fight. I'm just going to be with this, right? And everything, I mean, everything in our life changed after that moment. For me, it already changed for Jan, but for me, everything changed.
And you know what's so beautiful about that is, to this day, I'm still learning that at a deeper level, that when I all of a sudden get an insight that it's when you stop figuring it out that life unfolds for you and reveals itself to you. And we fight just letting go because we think we're always going to be on top of this. I'm gonna figure out a better way, to to enjoy my work, or a better way to get along with people, and I, that's what we do as humans. We use that intellect to try and figure it out, like that's our job, right? And yet it's the opposite. Like Sid talked so many times about, it's the opposite. And so when you just let go and you realize that you can get up in the morning and just enjoy the day, and that will bring you more productivity and being able to get along with people, then if you're trying to listen to your personal self that's always trying to figure it out, that's its job, always trying to figure it out. How can I do this better? But when it's that letting go, that's the opposite, that we just can't make that leap. But if we're lucky enough, and I know everybody on this call somewhere has had an experience where they slipped into a beautiful feeling through an insight, and life looked different. And then again, as human beings, we go back into the figure it out mode, analyzing ourselves or trying to make ourselves a better person. And then that's the game, right? We're all part of that. We can't escape that. However, as you learn and you get more of an understanding, and you get the patience to trust that it's not the big bang that we were all looking for in the 60s. We wanted to be enlightened, and we weren't going to settle for anything less. And so we were miserable. And then we meet this humble person who had that experience, but was there to say what it is. It's a something that's already happened. You're already there. Stop looking for it. And somebody who said to themselves, they had to go through, Sid had human experiences like everyone else, and he would have days where he wasn't feeling that great, but he knew that it didn't matter, because it's the knowledge that inside you already are all that joy and then when you just trust that and just accept the joy as it comes in, then it does increase. Like over the last 45 years, we have had our ups and downs, but there's this change, this gradual change towards more of a base and a default setting of having a nicer experience of life. So my life now is a much, much nicer experience than all those years ago. And yet 45 years ago, I felt so much joy in that first insight, knowing that I was okay, that it was like such a contrast from before. And I think the tendency is, when people get this understanding, is they want to go back to that first understanding where it's like the world just was so beautiful. And why do I have to go back into the world sucks occasionally?
That's true. It's true. But it's neat, because over the years, you see those times when you slip in, you're thinking with more humor and more compassion for yourself. And you're more willing to just let the cloud pass. I think it's like, this is probably turning it too lightly, but it's like you begin to see that it's not such a big deal to have moments of insecurity and stupid thinking. That's just, it's the human condition. But whatever that first insight you have, and all the insights you have, they continue to teach you for the rest of your life. Like that moment that I shared with you about seeing Jan and my son in that way. I didn't realize till months, maybe years later, what that really was. That was the first time that, for whatever reason, my thinking about Jan, about our relationship, about my son, about everything, it was a split second. For whatever reason, after listening for a few weeks by then, my thinking fell away in that moment. And that's all it really was. It was a moment, what I call seeing. But seeing, I mean, it's not like woo-woo. It was the experience of just looking without that thought from the past and seeing what was really in front of me. Seeing Jan and Peter, seeing them, not seeing them through the filter of my thinking. It just was a split second when that world stopped and I saw another world in front of me. And it's that simple. It's not more complicated than that, that you see, when you see the true world like that in a split second, whatever your inside is, you're home. Right? You are your true self, and that it's your true self looking. It was my true self looking at my wife and my son. And what's fascinating about that is that that's a profound guide to everything in your life. Like, once I saw them, it changed my whole way of interacting with them. It changed my way of how I felt about them. It changed everything because I saw that true world. And everyone who has an insight, who has that moment, that's really what it is. It's a moment of seeing the true world. And it teaches you for the rest of your life. Like, this is for us 45 years later, but I still have these beautiful moments when I see Jan brand new again, because, I have a belief system and a thought system, and I fall into, seeing Jan like we all do with our partners, this certain habits and so on. And then every once in a while, that insight comes back in and I see that's not who I'm living with. Right? It's much more beautiful than that. And then that feeling comes and your life is better once again. So here we are 45 years later, in a split second of falling into your true self is still teaching us. Right?
When you just said that, it just occurred to me that every second of our life, if it's like that, where it looks new to us, then there's so much power in that we don't really, haven't tapped into that every, like I experienced that with you, that when I'm in the feeling or if I had my little morning reading of Second Chance or one of Sid's books, and I get refreshed and I just have that beautiful feeling towards life and that secure feeling, then not only do you look new to me, but everything in my life, like every little thing in my reality, every physical thing in my reality looks like a gift. Like, it just occurred to me one day how we're surrounded by all these things that we collected over the years. But when we first were waiting for that, that new furniture, that new whatever it was, there was a joy, and I can't wait till it's delivered, or we get, and then you get it, and then you've already seen it after a while, the luster is gone, right? But when you're in that feeling, you look at everything in your world as brand new, and as somebody just gave you this. And I don't know about other people, but I know during this time when we've been home more, and we have been very diligent about, staying home and ordering our food and because we're getting old, so we're vulnerable. But we've slowed down, and it hasn't been like being stuck in the house. It's been like reacquainting ourselves. Like, I feel like I'm reacquainting with every little thing in my world, the people in my world, like Chip and our kids who we can only visit online, but it's reacquainting every moment. And every time you go into that deeper feeling, it is a brand new world that's presented to you.
Yeah, you begin to see that it's true that we learn individual things about ourselves and we grow in certain ways, but the real growth is in that shift to where you're looking at it from. Like, when you get quiet and you go to a deeper state, when you step out of your thinking, you literally go to a higher level of consciousness. And all that really means is that your perch is different. You're looking at the world from a different place. And that's what the new information is, right? Like that moment that I had showed me a whole other world that I wasn't seeing, right? And it's that seeing from that new perch that changes everything. And the reason it changes everything is not that, oh, now my marriage is better, now my work is better, or now I'm less insecure or less whatever. It's that you're seeing everything from that higher perch, from that new perspective. And that's the learning. The learning is where you're looking at it from, not what you're looking at, if that makes any sense. I wonder if there's...
I was just thinking that same thing.
We're on the same page. We're wondering if there are any questions or areas that people like to discuss more.
Because I know we're looking out at these faces,
Yeah.
and I sometimes I feel like I'm preaching to the choir
For sure.
because there's so many beautiful people. The ones I know and the things they've shared with me have been amazing.
Jan, can you share what exactly you heard from Sid at the party that day?
Yeah, the get together, small get together in his living room. I heard Sid all of a sudden, well, first of all, he was talking as we hear him talk on his recordings. He was saying these beautiful truths about life. And I can't remember what each one was, but each one, every statement he made was checking a box in my head with everything that I'd always considered to be wisdom through all the reading that I'd done my whole life. And so, but as he was talking, I kind of got a quieter mind. So because before that, my mind was so busy. It was always full of thoughts of worry, basically. Worry, what's going to become of us, and thoughts of insecurity. You know, what do people think of me? And I'm not a good person, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, my mind kind of was going blank because I'm just listening instead of imposing on my thoughts on my reality. I'm listening and soaking in all this wisdom. And then all of a sudden, Sid looked over at me and he said, if everybody in this room and everyone in the world could see who they really are and how beautiful they really are inside, they'd have all the happiness they can ever imagine. And I just heard that. I heard it. It was like it snuck in under the radar of all of that busy, worried thought. And I felt total peace. And I had this knowing that my life was going to be just fine. It was going to I was going to have a beautiful life. And it was as if this pathway was spread in front of me. And in my head, I actually saw a pathway. And it wasn't, I couldn't see any details, but something from inside told me that my life is going to be beautiful, including my marriage. And then as I sat there and sat in that beautiful feeling and that quiet in my head, what I'd heard in the wise people that I always, respected through life, what occurred to me was that the wise people were always trying to tell us, don't listen to me, you have to hear yourself. And so what hit me was the words weren't coming from Sid. I was sitting there with this person who I just met, and he was saying all these amazing things, but I knew that the wisdom was only coming from in me. And it wasn't out there. And I knew it. And I can't explain what that felt like, but it's like all my life I heard the words, but they were other people's words. This time they were coming from me. And in that moment, I knew that if that was true, then that wisdom had always been there my whole life. And that meant it was always be there for the rest of my life. And so that knowing was my insight. I think that was actually the biggest insight. And the two were combined. Who I really am is way more beautiful than I thought. And by the way, no one else can bring me that. I already had it. And so then also Sid mentioned something about, because there were couples in the room, and he said, you'll find it really helpful in life if when you're in a discussion or an argument with someone, you're not agreeing with someone, if you can just back out of the argument or the discussion and just don't try and win, don't try and be right. And if you're feeling upset or, you're getting angry, just let it go. And I remember thinking, well, I need to always be defending my point of view. And so that didn't make sense. But then I knew that this wise person had obviously knew something I didn't know. So I was ready to just go home and be open to that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went home,
That's
that was the
beautiful.
most helpful thing. Yeah. So much for asking that question.
Mhm.
You're welcome.
And I will add one more thing for everybody too, that when I got home and Chip described that, that he wasn't ready to hear this, but a few days later, after I'd been watching Chip being resistant, and I was so shocked because when I got home, I thought, well, we had both been on this search together. Of course, he's going to be thrilled when I tell him what happened, No. And so then, without realizing it, I was waiting for Chip to get what I got, to get this understanding. And so I was being, patiently waiting, and as Chip said, I wasn't engaging in arguments. However, one day another insight came to me, and that was that what I just said, I was waiting for Chip to get this, because I was looking over at Chip and in the very beginning, and I could see he was so unhappy. But what I saw was what I'd heard from Sid about how everybody's innocent, everybody's beautiful inside. And I saw the same for Chip. And as I was looking at him, it's like when he said he could see that day, I saw Chip without all the stress in his face. And it was almost like his face just changed in front of me. And then it just kind of went back. But I saw something. And what I saw was, if I really heard something, I would see that Chip doesn't need to get anything. He's already there. Like all of us, we're all already there. And that was the day that I feel that insight has helped me so much in life, because it's so easy to take on a feeling from other people's behavior when we really don't have to. And I'm a human being every day. I take on feelings from other people's behavior, or the thoughts of other people's behavior, memories of but I know that's not a reality. It's not, I'm making that up. And so now, even though I experience as a human being taking on feelings from other people's behavior, it gets less and less. And now my experience of life is becoming more my own experience, and it's becoming more and more what I would love it to be. And not only do I not be as bothered by other people's behavior, but I see their behavior changing. Like, not just in my imagination, but people's behavior actually does change when you back off.
Well, yeah. When Jan talks about that moment, it's so weird because we didn't talk about that. Jan didn't say, I'm not going to try and convince you about the principles anymore. You're great. Nothing like that. But I felt it. I don't know how to explain that. I just felt that that edge, that tension, that little bit just fall away. And then I was really on my own. It's like up until that moment, I'm in a bad mood. Jan keeps bugging me about this 3 principles crap. And it's Sid Banks, dude. And then it just stopped, and that being on my own was the best thing in the world for me. And I guess the other thing is, this is just a surmise on my part, is that when Jan saw that and I felt that change, it was like a really deep feeling of acceptance from her, and that changed the dynamic of our relationship tremendously. So that was no small thing. That was a big part of our growth in the beginning. And of course, it works both ways. We've both been able to do that through the years. And the idea of seeing people beyond, as Sid would say in the old days when he would talk about when we were going to work with people, he would say, just ignore the mask. Just talk to the person behind the mask. And he said, sometimes that's who will talk back, and then you've got it, And that's been so great through the years. I mean, in business, when we worked with executives and CEOs, the mask of the big important person would fall away, and we would just be with that person. When we worked in the prison system with inmates, the same thing. We have somebody that had all the outward markings of, the heavy duty criminal, and that would fall away. We would just have these souls in front of us, and that really guides you how to share, because the biggest part of sharing this understanding is realizing who you're sharing it with. You're not sharing it with that person's personality. Right? You're sharing with that part inside of them. And that's what you're looking to see come awake. So that's the guide for how to share the principles, actually, is how you're looking at the people you're talking to. Right? And it's been true for our whole life. I mean, I never got over this. I still don't get over it, that my father was an alcoholic, could be violent at times. He was quite a character, right? And yet I had this experience with him after now talking to him for many, many years, like 12 years, of being in a room with him and seeing this poor soul that was really suffering rather than this evil person who ruined my life. And it allowed me to speak beyond his mask. And I did. And it touched him, and he changed as a result, which is to this day completely blows my mind. But it was the same thing when we would sit down with a group of addicts. We didn't see a group of addicts. We had quite a period of time of working with heroin addicts and alcoholics and stuff. And, we have our baggage when we go in, like we're going to see this group of addicts. And then because we knew that that's not the point, even though we would have those thoughts, we would just see this group of people that were perfectly okay in the moment and speak to that. And in the prison system, that was very interesting, because in the prison system, corrections officers and the deputy warden and stuff would say things like, why are they so quiet in your class? Like most classes, almost every class, we have to go in and drag somebody out because they're arguing or being disrespectful, and we put them in solitary and all this kind of stuff. It never happens. What are you doing to those people? Right? And we'd have to think like, I don't know, we just sharing our stories and talking about what we've seen. But I did come to see that what that was because we looked at them in that way, they felt that. They felt the absence of the judgment. Right? They felt some unconditional love. And as a result, most of them felt deeply respected and responded accordingly.
And that it leveled the playing field.
Yeah, for sure.
That we were there to share an experience with them and not to feel that we had to better them. And I one night we were talking to the women, and I'm looking at them, and it just dawned on me that if they took these different programs, they could get what they call gain time. So they could get out of prison earlier. So their case kept getting reviewed. And so one night it just occurred to me that maybe as much as they love coming to our sessions, they think that they're coming to this session like they go to the other ones where they're improving themselves as a human being. And I looked at them and it just occurred to me to say to the women, this really isn't a self-improvement class. And they looked at me and because all their classes were about self-improvement. That was the whole thing. And I said, because all we've been talking about since we first came here was who you really are on the inside, who we really are, who you really are on the inside. And so if you really trust in that, then you're already perfect inside. There's nothing to improve on. And that was an insight for me because I know that we all do that. We think there's a better version of ourselves. And so we're always like chasing after it, or feeling bad that we're not that better version. And when all along, all we have to do is just see who we are in this moment is perfect. Like this is full circle for when Sid said, look at everybody and see that they're perfect. It starts with yourself. And if you're not doing it, that's when if things aren't going right in your life, you can bet that you're not seeing your own goodness and your own beauty. And I feel like, especially lately where we've had this, we're fortunate to have more time to ourselves. I know that's not everybody in the world. I know some people are, actually their life has gotten busier because they're,
Or they're suffering.
Or they don't have the luxury of what we have to be able to be home. But it's teaching me again that my world is unfolding and I'm being given the gifts every moment in life.
I love that conversation with that group of inmates, so-called inmates. Right? That was really beautiful. That you said this is not a self-improvement class, and it was kind of confusing for them. And they asked questions like, okay, well, if it's not, how does that change my life? How does that change my behavior? And so we just said, well, do you remember when you were a little kid and you had a brand new bicycle and you felt really great, or your best friend and yourself were at the beach and you're just really enjoying yourself? Whatever. Remember that feeling? There was some nodding in the room. And I asked this question. I said, can you imagine doing anything to hurt yourself or anybody else when you have that feeling? And in unison, they all said no. They knew that. And then Jan said something to the effect of, well, this class is about finding that feeling. And the rest will take care of itself. And it's true. It's true.
And when I look back, we were in there just because we love being there. And they would think, well, it's Friday night, you could be out on a date or so. Why are you so happy to be coming in here? But it was just such a joy because there was so much respect and gratitude that we would like, why wouldn't we want to be there? It was like a gift to us. But the more we did that, the more we realized that we didn't have to teach, that we just had to relax and see the beauty in those beautiful women. And they really were.
They were beautiful.
And the fact that we had all these luxuries, like I was just saying, we're taking it for granted that we're able to stay home and we have everything we need here on Salt Spring. But when I'd go home at night and I think they were getting happier in the direst of circumstances, like not just the physical environment they were living in, but the things that were happening continually. Not only had they suffered trauma, most of them, and in their life, but ongoing, being separated from their kids and being judged by their families, being, even while they were in there, having hurtful things being said to them by their families, and finding out things that were happening to their kids in foster care that were horrible. And they were in the
They were
midst of
amazing.
all that, they were becoming happy. And that was humbling,
It
and
was,
and it showed us like who's teaching who. That's
yeah,
what I
for
felt
sure,
like.
for sure.
So it's amazing what life brings us.
Could you share what Sid Banks experienced during his breakthrough and how it led to the three principles, especially since he initially didn't use terms like consciousness, thought, or mind?
Well, he actually did use all of
He used all those words, but he hadn't even together his principles yet.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. He talked about mind, he talked about consciousness, and he talked about thought from the very beginning. But what's interesting, I think, is that, if you have an experience like that, it doesn't mean like he only had the language and culture that he knew, just like all of us, right? He was very limited education. Right? The only books he'd ever read were on welding, right? So he had this experience. He knew what that experience was. He knew that his personality had died for a split second, and he'd seen what is beyond that personality. He knew that, but he had to learn how to talk to the world about it, what the world's vocabulary was about it, right? And so from the very beginning, he did talk about mind, consciousness, and thought. It's when he started to meet people, including psychologists and so on, that he began to see that these were principles. And then as he talked to psychologists, he just had more insights about these are the underlying principles for all of life. And they're also the underlying principles for a new approach to psychology. Right? So like all of us, he was learning as well. But his learning wasn't about what that deep insight was. He knew what that was. His learning was what it meant to the world and how to talk to the world about it. And, I love watching Sid through the years because I could see his vocabulary changing. I could see that he learned so quickly how to talk to a group of business people, how to talk to a group of psychologists. He ended up having these visits with physicists in the United States almost yearly for a while. He talked to them. And so it was a learning process for him as well. And, I'm going to just give you my view of what happened to him, but, from conversations with him, he had a moment where, and he put it this way, where he died. Now, his physical body was still standing there in that moment, but his personality just died. And he saw what is. And for him, it was a profoundly spiritual experience. And in that, he saw the true nature of this life, because he saw the true nature of himself, who and what he was. He saw that. And he could have, I think, just had a wonderful life by himself with his family and all kinds of peace of mind and happiness, but he was committed because he saw how simple it was, who and what we really were, our true identity. He committed to sharing that with the world for his whole life, and he worked every minute of his life from that point on. I mean, when Sid was dying, he was in the hospital. He only had weeks or days left. And we went over to the city to be near him. We were staying in a hotel near the hospital. And sometimes we'd go in to spell his family to help him get started in the morning, right? And I remember going in there at 6:45, 6:30, 6:45 in the morning, and he's sitting in his bed, working on his computer, working on his books, working on sharing it even more. Right? There's a beautiful story of where he came back to live out his life at his home, but he had to go into the hospital once here on Salt Spring. There's a beautiful story about somebody went in to see him, but he had a group of nurses standing around his bed. And he was saying, I've had the most unusual life. I've seen things you can't imagine. And he's telling the nurses the whole story, right? And they're spellbound. They're absolutely spellbound. So that insight that he had, that profound enlightenment, he shared that throughout his whole life, right? we were at his house just a few days before he passed. And at that point, he hadn't been able to get out of bed for quite some time. His voice was pretty much a whisper, right? And the phone rang, and his wife answered the phone. Judy answered the phone, and I heard her saying, "Oh, I don't think so. I don't think you understand the situation here." And then she put her hand over the phone and she said to Jan and I, "It's so-and-so." It was this wealthy person we knew, saying that he had these Israeli soldiers over from Israel studying the principles, and he wanted to know if they could come and meet Sid. And I go, "Oh, there's no way. I mean, he really doesn't understand the situation, right?" And then Judy says, "Well, yeah, but I've got to ask Sid." So she disappears into the bedroom and she comes out shaking her head. He wants to see them, right? And so we go down to the dock, Jan and I. We had 2 cars at the time. And the float plane, the seaplane lands, and these 4, he was 4, right? Wounded Israeli soldiers scramble out of the plane with their apparatus and so on for their injuries. We load everything in our cars. It takes both our cars completely full to get all the stuff. And we proceed to drive up to Sid's house, right? And so we go in, and these 4 soldiers who look like they don't know what they're doing or why they're in this little island on the west coast of Canada. Imagine what this would look like if you were raised in Israel. And they file into Sid's room, and they stand around his bed. And there was no room for Jan and I, but we were just outside around the hall so we could hear him basically speaking in that whisper. And he's telling the whole story about their true nature and what happened to him. And it's just going on. And then out of nowhere, just out of nowhere, his 42-year-old voice just came alive. Like his deep, full voice was there. And he's just giving them the whole thing. He's telling them the whole story, right? He's just doing everything he can to lift them, you know? And then there was a long silence. And one of the soldiers said, "Sid, how do you feel about the fact that you're lying here dying of cancer?" And there was a bit of a pause, and Sid said, "Well, it's bloody inconvenient." And everybody laughed so hard. I could hear those guys they were just killing themselves laughing, and Sid was laughing too. And it was so amazing. And for us, it was kind of neat not to be in the room, because we watched 4 guys walk in and 4 different people walk out. And they were really touched. And it's just an example of how he saw from that world, right? Most of the time. He had his times when he got caught up and would get frustrated about how the principles were going out or whatever. But that never lasted long. He always was back in that state. And he just continually took care as much as possible. And the fun part of that story is another friend of ours told us about how Sid phoned that afternoon, and he was so excited about what had happened, so excited that he'd had that experience. He's so grateful that he'd had that experience. So I know I kind of drifted there, but yeah.
I was struck by your statement. The change is not what I'm looking at, but where I'm looking from. It feels deeply true, but it also makes me wonder, where exactly is that where? Is there a specific place or state to be in to see from a different perspective? This ties to my struggles with understanding consciousness in the 3 principles. Could you elaborate on this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I don't want to sound what's the word? I'll just say it's like there is somewhere to be, but you're already there. Right? But for your thinking.
Mm.
So as our minds get quieter and that thinking falls away, it's more realizing that we're there. You know, like everybody right now in this moment, everybody on this call is home. Everybody has what they're looking for. Right? And I'm glad you asked, because I think one of the misnomers in the 3 principles community, and the world for that matter, is the idea that we need to put pressure on ourselves to learn and grow, and it's actually quite the opposite. We need to accept our humanity more and get quieter and just watch things come and go and take the pressure off. Like, it's beautiful to have a vision that there's a quieter, better life and a nicer feeling. But if that becomes something that you create more tension from, you're still moving in the wrong direction. Right? So all we can really do, and it's more than enough, all we can really do is listen, right? And continue to listen. And for us, I'll just be blunt about it. I don't know anybody I would rather listen to than Sid Banks, who had that experience. So for us, that's what we do. And I'm not listening to get to a better place. Right? I'm just listening. In fact, if I find myself listening to get to a better place, I know I'm missing and I need to discard that and just listen. Right? Because everybody on this call probably has had a touch of that feeling. So they know that home exists. They know that there's a beautiful state of mind if you want a higher level of consciousness that exists. It doesn't mean you don't have it because you don't see it. It's a matter of realizing it. And that the portal that takes you to that realizing of it is listening. And if you're lucky enough to have something to listen to that's coming from that place, then that's all it is. Like, I've never really been able to explain this, but I know that when I'm listening in the morning to one of Sid's recordings or reading one of his books, I know I'm not listening to Sid Banks. I'm listening. And if I'm lucky enough in that moment, I end up listening to myself. I end up realizing that I am home, not that I need to find home. And consciousness is difficult to talk about, but I will say this about it. In this last year or so, I've had these feelings of being caught up in thinking about this or that, wishing this would go away or that. And then having this beautiful feeling just kind of come. And what it is this. I have all my little issues and everything, but meanwhile, I'm living in the middle of a moment-to-moment miracle called consciousness. I mean, that's what's really happening. That consciousness is this profound miracle to be conscious, right? And to have thought to maneuver through this consciousness, right? And to have a connection to this, whatever this is, this thing called mind, the energy that lights it all up, right? But I love entertaining that idea that consciousness itself, never mind the details of what you're seeing or where you're looking at it from, consciousness itself is a profound moment-to-moment miracle. And when I visit that just a little bit, it changes the amount of importance I place on things, right? It deflates the amount of importance I put on my little issues and problems, just compared to the fact that that miracle is happening moment to moment, and I am it. I'm experiencing it, man.
And I'd like to share, Allie, what helps me too is I'm learning that more I listen and the more I'm hearing from my own wisdom, the more I catch those moments when I'm automatically putting myself down, like psychologically just thinking negatively about myself, like that, again, that self-improvement, and so I'll have a thought and then I'll feel bad about that thought. And as I started to catch on, like, why do I do that? Like, why not just see the beauty? Like, that was my first insight 45 years ago that changed so much in my life that I couldn't have imagined. I couldn't have dreamed up the reality that we've lived in since then. I couldn't have dreamed it up. And that from that one insight of seeing how beautiful I am and seeing my goodness. And so now throughout the day, it's getting easier for me to spot when that habit of doubting, or thinking I'm not enough, or why did I do that, or I shouldn't have said that, or I wish I could be like so and so, and there's always in this beautiful feeling, but now I catch it and I see you're doing it again. Always like giving yourself the doubting yourself. And so as I started to catch on to that, I just kind of threw caution to the wind and just started doing things I love more, and just not feeling like I have to be striving, and giving myself more time, just to just do what brings me a beautiful feeling. And so that's what I do when I share with people often before I see you next time. Why don't you do those beautiful things you were telling me about at the beginning of the call that have been bringing you that beautiful feeling? And so then in the next call, they say, wow, like I started doing things that make me feel good, and all these other things are coming together.
Jan, Chip, do you have time for one more question?
Oh, absolutely. This is too much fun.
Yeah.
Okay, this one's from me. You've
Oh.
you've told me a story in the past of set on a beach where you kind of got your marching orders. And I would, if you're open to it, I would just love to hear that story.
That's a nice way to close.
Yeah.
Well, it was in the early days. We'd been to a few talks. Our marriage was completely changed. And I remember having a lot of emotion in those times, like good feelings, not upset, like just beautiful feelings. But I still had my, I don't know what you call it, my macho thing where I didn't want to show that in front of people, right? So we'd been to a talk on a Saturday night. It was absolutely, shit, it was amazing. And I was so touched during the talk that I got emotional. I had to go outside. I didn't want people looking at me when I was being emotional, right? And, but it was beautiful. It was just fantastic night. And the next day, Sid called and said, I'm going to have a barbecue, a bonfire in front of my house on the beach here on Salt Spring. You guys want to come just around dusk, and we'll sit around the fire and have a chat, maybe have some food, So, oh, that sounds great. So we went down to Sid's place, and he had a nice little piece of rocky but nice beach in front of his house, and there was a fire going, and there was maybe 7 or 8 people there, and we're sitting around and just talking about our kids and the usual, just normal stuff, the weather, whatnot. And then Sid just, boom, talking about true nature of life, our own true nature. And it was just the most spiritual, profound talk. And I started filling up, and I got really emotional. And it just was, I don't know how to explain it. I just knew that we had been given the privilege of seeing the true meaning of this life. I couldn't have described it, but that was the feeling. But I started to get emotional again, and I didn't want to be emotional in front of everybody. And by then it was quite dark. So I stood up and I walked down the beach to get away from everybody. I found a log to sit on. And I don't know if anybody's ever experienced this, but in the waters here at night, sometimes there's a phenomena that's called bioluminescence, where these little animals in the water are like little stars. They light up. So it was really active this night. So at my feet, where the water was rolling in, the little waves, was like a light show in this dark night. It was absolutely, it just grabbed my attention. I just was totally into it. And then I felt this soft person sit beside me, and it was Jan. So we're sitting there for a while in the dark, watching this bioluminescence in the water, right? And then from behind us, we heard, and it was Sid standing behind me. You barely see him. It was so dark. And, we had just learned to put our own life in order, right? It just happened. And out of nowhere, Sid said, so you pair want to share this with the world, do you? And I'll be honest, I had not thought about doing that yet. If I had, it was a fleeting thought. But we both, in unison, we both said, yeah, absolutely, we do. And Sid was quiet for a moment, and he said, well, There's no life like it. There's absolutely no life like it. He said, you take my hand, you walk all over this world with me, and we'll find people in various stages of sleep. We'll touch them on the shoulder with love, and we'll watch them wake up. He said, there's no life like it. And that's the truth. There is no life like it.
Thank you both so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything you've contributed to me personally and to my clients and my community over the years, and to everyone here. Gita, can you unmute everyone so we can give Chip and Jan just a massive round of applause?
Thanks for your attention. I look forward to seeing you soon.